Hello, Adora Alfie here. So with Path of Exile's early access right around the corner, I wanted to talk about the build that I'm planning on playing during early access, right? At least like for my first build. This is not a build guide since we don't really have all the information, path of building isn't ready, and all that stuff. So this is just going to be a rough like idea of what I'm planning. And I will be streaming on both YouTube and Twitch for roughly, I think, 65 hours for the first 4 days or so. I've kind of scheduled it like that, so hopefully things go well, and if you want to see how the build performs, feel free to like drop by and check it out. Anyway, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the actual Ascendancy. I'm going to be playing as Mercenary, but within Mercenary I'm going to be picking Witch Hunter, right? For Witch Hunter, there's one specific combo that I want to try. The combo that I want to try is the synergy between Decimating Strike and Witchbane. So the way Witchbane works, first of all, is that enemies have concentration equal to 40% of their maximum life, right? And you can break concentration by doing damage, and it counts like 100% of your damage towards concentration, right? So if you do a 40% of the damage, 40% of the HP and damage, it takes out the concentration down to 0, right? And once they have like the concentration down to 0, this basically affects their cooldown recovery rate down to 50%. So if you take out all the concentration, they'll recover their cooldowns at like half the speed, right? So like something that takes 4 seconds will take 8 seconds, for example. So this affects like a lot of the boss attacks and things like that, like the big attacks that they have, right? And the other thing is, with the node ops that No Mercy, right? You can also do more damage towards enemies based on how much concentration they're missing. So if they're missing all of their concentration, it should be 30%. Assuming that it like scales linearly, that should be like, 15% at half and so on. So the thing that I want to test here is with Decimating Strike, right? Decimating Strike basically means that when you first hit an enemy that's on full life, it takes out anywhere between 5% to 30%, right? So the average of that would be, I think, 17.5% roughly. And if you're lucky, you can take out like 30% of the health on like the first hit. It doesn't matter how much damage your attack does, it'll take out like a number of like that amount of HP, right? And then it applies the actual damage of the hit. So what I want to know here is the damage or like the HP, the life taken out by Decimating Strike, right? Does it count as damage dealt? Because on Witchbane, it says that break enemy concentration on hit equal to 100% of damage dealt. And Decimating Strike, it does like kind of happen during the hit. So if it does count as like damage dealt, right? For the purpose of Witchbane, that would mean that like on your first strike, if you're really lucky, you'll be doing 30% of the maximum HP, which is 75% of the maximum concentration. Which also means that you'll be doing like bonus damage thanks to No Mercy after that, right? So after your first hit, if you do 30% through Decimating Strike, you'll basically be doing a bonus of 22.5% like bonus damage from No Mercy. If you do the average of 17.5% with Decimating Strike, you're still going to be doing like a bonus of 13.125%, I think, through No Mercy. So you kind of get like a little bit of a leg up for basically nothing from just like hitting them once, right? And the next part is Culling Strike. So Culling Strike is just a little bonus. Depending on the type of enemy, for normal enemies it's 30% or below, for magic it's 20 or below, rare it's 10, and for unique and bosses usually it's 5%. So this basically means that when enemies go down to that percent, they just taken out, right? And you can increase this percentage a little bit. There's like a few nodes on the tree I think that affect this. But basically, for bosses, it's not a huge deal, but like 5% is pretty significant, so it's pretty cool. And another cool thing about Culling Strike is that it doesn't depend on like the amount of damage you're doing. Even if you do 1 damage, if they're within Culling Strike range, they're just gone, right? So that like even if you do like small attacks, that final one small attack could do like 5% of the HP, right? Where it normally would only do like 1 damage or something like really low, right? So Culling Strike can synergize really well with like rapid fire attacks is what I was kind of thinking, right? So that's like not the masteries, the ascendancies that I want to try, right? And with that, next is the skills that I want to try and work with this. Like I said, I want to try like rapid fire skills because like rapid fire and Culling Strike in my mind could work really well. Because if you have like a lot of like projectiles just going into like a crowd of enemies, for example, right? It's gonna use Decimating Strike on each one of them and knock down like the first like maybe like 17% of the HP or so, right? And then it's gonna scale its damage based off of like breaking their concentration. And on top of that, like once it gets to a certain percentage, they get culled, right? If it's normal enemies, like it's gonna go like pretty fast. I think, what was it, 30%, right? So that's gonna be pretty good. So the attacks that I want to try out with this, first of all, is armor piercing rounds. So armor piercing rounds is basically a rapid fire kind of like attack for the crossbow, right? Where you by default have 14 bolts according to like the whatchamacallit, Path of Exile database, right? However, we are not entirely sure about all the numbers on this, so I'm just gonna like kind of go with the vibes of like the information we have, right? Because all these numbers could be old as well. Because a lot of these like numbers are from like videos and stuff that are kind of old, right? So a lot of these numbers have been adjusted. But basically, what I want to work with armor piercing rounds is I want to use this to break armor, and to kind of like just be a default attack that can use like really often, right? So in order to get that, I also want to put ammo conservation on this, which basically increases if, for example, we had 14 rounds or 14 bolts, it would go up to like roughly 23-ish kind of bolts with like the bonus it has to not consume a bolt. Plus, like we can get like an additional like 20% chance or like even higher like chances of not like consuming bolts, right, in our skill tree, which will reduce that, which will basically increase the amount of effective bolts we have, right? On top of that, like armor piercing rounds by itself already like breaks armor, right? I want to use Splinter to increase the amount of armor we break, which basically allows us to break armor equal to 15% of physical damage dealt by the supported skill. And then on top of that, increase our physical damage by using Brutality so that we break even more armor. And on top of that, use Armor Explosion, so every time we break an enemy's armor, we basically cause an explosion. So with like normal enemies and stuff, this might like be enough to do significant damage to them and maybe even take them out with just this skill, right? And to kind of support this like playstyle, I want to either use reload speed if like the reload speed for armor piercing rounds is too high and it doesn't feel good, right? In that case, I'll use reload speed. But if like the reload speed is okay, like after getting a bunch of like, you know, modifiers on our crossbow or maybe like skills from the skill tree and stuff, right? I could swap to like many bolts or something, or maybe even volley. Many bolts here would basically increase the damage that we do, so we can break even more armor, right? And volley increases the number of hits we do, and I think all of these hits should trigger like things like Splinter and also like the default like armor breaking skill that armor piercing rounds have, right? So that's what I'm kind of trying with armor piercing rounds. So once you've broken the armor of an enemy, the next way to capitalize on that, right, is by using high velocity rounds. So with high velocity rounds, we can basically consume armor broken to do bonus damage, right? It does like an extra like 150% more damage if the enemy's armor is broken. So this is really good against like rares or like slightly tougher like magic enemies maybe, and especially bosses, right? Another support that I want to try and use with this is Exploit Weakness. I'm not sure if Exploit Weakness actually stacks with high velocity rounds, because high velocity rounds already has the ability to consume break armor, right, and to do additional damage. I'm not sure if like Exploit Weakness will stack. I really don't think it will, but if it does, that could basically let us like double down on consuming armor, right? The next thing I kind of want to use is Double Barrel, because like high velocity rounds only has one shot, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and then you need to reload, right? So by using Double Barrel, you can basically attack twice. Only one of those attacks will be able to consume armor break, but the second attack will still do damage, right? And to increase the amount of damage that we do with this, I want to use Iron Grip, because like mercenaries will have both strength and dexterity, and strength is really good because strength gives you a lot of life, right? So with Iron Grip, we can also use that strength to basically give more damage to our main damaging skill, hopefully. And also ranged combat, I'm not too sure if I want to keep ranged combat, because like we need to be further than 7 meters away to do bonus damage. Or like, that's the maximum damage, I think, right? Yeah, that's the maximum damage. So we need to be further than 3.5 meters away to do a bonus damage. So like range combat, I'm not sure if it's going to be super useful, but I want to try and run it as well. And on top of that, I want to add lightning damage, because like lightning damage kind of will synergize with other skills that I have kind of set up for this, because I want this to be like physical and lightning, rapid fire, topped off with the high velocity shot, right? And to add even more like physical damage, I'm thinking of maybe putting like physical mastery or something, if like Exploit Weakness doesn't work, for example, right? Because we can only have like 5 support skills on a skill, so that's basically what I have planned for high velocity rounds. So the idea here is break armor with armor piercing and finish them off with high velocity, or like for bosses you basically repeat the cycle of breaking armor and doing damage, right? The next thing I want to add to this twist, to this basically mix, is the flash grenade, right? So the flash grenade has some interesting things where I can stun enemies, which is really good because like crowd control is so good. It works on bosses in Path of Exile too, so you could stun enemies and then use like rapid fire and like, well, armor piercing rounds and high velocity to do damage, right? So I want to get multiple projectiles to increase the amount of stun that we do, because like more grenades equal more stun. Devastate, which basically means every time we stun an enemy, we basically break the armor, right? So I could basically break their armor, stun them, break their armor, and then switch to high velocity, capitalize on their armor being broken, and then go back to like AP rounds or whatever, right? And then overpower to increase the amount of stun buildup, reduce cooldowns so that we can spam more grenades, second wind to like get a second grenade, and maybe get less duration instead of one of these, right? Maybe get less duration instead of like overpower, or maybe get less duration instead of like second wind or reduce cooldown, right? Because like less duration makes the fuse shorter. Right now we have like 0.85 seconds. It'll basically reduce that fuse by 30%, right? So that's pretty good, and it'll make it easier to like time the flash grenade. With fast moving bosses and stuff, less duration will be pretty useful, I think. Okay, so the next skill, this is where lightning comes in, right? I have two skills that I kind of want to try and work with lightning, but this is the first one, right? This one makes a bit more sense because it's Galvanic shots, which is kind of like a shotgun type of attack. And for this, I want to add lightning exposure so that lightning skills will do more damage. So if I use Galvanic shards, apply lightning exposure, and then switch to high velocity, which has added lightning damage, will do even more damage, right? So you could break armor, use Galvanic shards to apply lightning exposure, and then switch to high velocity. So you have like a 1-2-3 kind of combo there, right? And we could also add things like area of effect to make it easier to hit like a lot of targets, chain so that it hits like huge crowds and stuff. So it's both like targeted lightning exposure for bosses and also like a huge AoE to like just debuff a bunch of enemies, right? And then close combat and concentrated effect, I'm a bit iffy on because they kind of increase the damage of Galvanic shards. And in my mind, Galvanic shards is more of like a debuff kind of support kind of skill. But if you're gonna get like damage, you might as well get damage. So like close combat and concentrated effect might be not too bad. But we're gonna have to see what other like supports we have before I can decide exactly what to put on this, right? So this is to debuff like enemies with lightning exposure, and also it does lightning damage, so that could apply shock as well. We could attach like other things to this that like let us like apply shock faster, but we can only use like one skill gem, like each skill gem once in our loadout, right? So those skill gems that apply shock, I want to try and put them on rapid shot. So this one's a bit more tricky because I'm not entirely sure if this is how I want to run it, right? With rapid shots, I want to add like a bunch of stuff that increases like shock chance. So for example, just like straight up shock chance, and also conduction, right? And also fast attack so that we attack more often and thus like are more likely to shock the enemy. However, rapid shots does fire damage by default, right? So I'm wondering if we can also like get ignition to like apply ignite, and then also use like stormfire so that when enemies are ignited, their shock doesn't like expire, right? Or something along those lines. And maybe add in volley so that we just have like a ton of projectiles flying all over the place, right? Because one other thing we need to keep in mind is because of the Ascendancy that we have, right? With Witchbane, if enemies aren't taking damage, they basically regain their concentration, right? And with like with bosses and stuff, they might have like invulnerability periods where they're just not going to be able to be damaged for a while. Or when they're like doing big attacks, you're going to have to be dodging and stuff, right? So the longer you can keep like doing damage to them, or like the more like projectiles you just have like flying around all the time, the better, right, for this. So I'm wondering if we could get like something like rapid shot with like a lot of projectiles, get it to bounce off of walls and stuff, and then maybe put like slow projectiles to make the projectiles just really slow, so they kind of like just keep damaging the enemy, right? That's one idea that I have. Another idea is, if you get like cast on shock, and then maybe put like something like lightning storm, that will constantly be chunking away at the enemy as well. So that'll kind of like make sure that like their concentration keeps like depleting, right? That's also another idea. But cast on shock is also useful for other things like debuffs, because like lightning storm isn't gonna like scale too well with our build, because we're not gonna be doing a lot of like magic, right? We're not gonna be doing a lot of straight up like elemental lightning damage. So instead, putting something like enfeeble to reduce enemies damage, even with bosses, I think it reduces the damage by 16%. Or putting vulnerability for, I think physical, yeah, vulnerability, they lose armor, right? And temporal chains to slow them down. Or conductivity, I think, makes them like weaker towards lightning attacks. Like one of those things could be like a good like pick for cast on shock too. Especially if you're like casting on shock like right after we use what was it, Galvanic shards, right? So use Galvanic shards, get the lightning debuffs on them, apply even more debuffs with cast on shock, and then switch to like high velocity right after that, or something along those lines, right? So like this might be good for cast and shock. I'm not sure what are the like cool things you could do with cast and shock, but that's one of the ideas that I have. Okay, so next for buffs, I'm thinking of getting scavenge plating, because with all the armor breaks that we'll be getting a lot of armor from scavenge plating, and hopefully that'll help us with survivability a bit. I'm not too like jazzed about the thorns that it'll be giving us, but at least like the armor might like help us a little bit, right, with survivability. So that's what I'm thinking about that. And on scavenge plating, I think we can put precision and vitality, which will increase our accuracy and also our life regen, so that's a bit more survivability from there too, right? And other than that, like Voltaic Mark would be good too, because then we can mark enemies, which increase their chance to like shock them. And when they do get shocked, the shock has like a bigger effect on them. And the effect of shock is that like enemies take damage from, like they take more damage from all sources. So if enemies are shocked, they'll basically just be taking more damage all the time, and like increased shock basically means they take even more damage, right? Lingering illusion might be useful too, because we might be dodge rolling quite a bit to like dodge enemy attacks and stuff. Especially because like the crossbow is kind of slow, right? So instead of like just running and gunning all the time, you're gonna have to like dodge from time to time. So having like an illusion to distract enemies could be really good, especially because you want to like keep your distance, right? The last one, Herald of Thunder. I'm not entirely sure how this works. I think this might like kind of mess up our shock like build up, right? Because I'm not sure if, when it says like cannot inflict shock, I'm not sure if it means that like the damage from this skill can't inflict shock, or this prevents me from like inflicting shock like ever, right? If that's the case, like Herald of Thunder could be really, really bad. And also it says like melee and bow. I'm not sure if it works on crossbows, right? So if Herald of Thunder works, it might actually be, or like if it works without like casting out shock, it could be really interesting to just like get rid of armor break and just go like full send on shock and lightning, right? So that's what I have planned for like the skills that I want to try out. The next thing would be the actual skill tree, right? The skill tree we have less information about, right? However, there are like a few things that are pretty like straightforward, like getting more projectile damage and stun buildup would be really nice for sure. There is more projectile damage and like chance to chain from terrain, so like things will bounce off of terrain and stuff, which is really nice. And you can even get like more like ailment chance and stuff like that over here. There's a bunch of like two-handed damage like down here and stuff. Over here we have like an increased amount of life leech, and if you're leeching life, you kind of you have more armor and evasion rating, right? So it increases your defenses by leeching life. So that's pretty good, especially because like that synergizes really well with the stuff down here. Fast metabolism, right? Leech life effects are not removed when unreserved life is filled. So even if you get to max HP, your leech life is still going to be working, because usually how it would work is if you get to max HP, your leech life just disappears, right? So if we pick this up, we can basically keep our armor and evasion rating buffed even if we have max HP, if you're leeching life, right? And then there's like ways to reduce the speed of your leech life too, so things like that would be useful as well. Other than that, there are like some really cool stuff like, yeah, increased chance to pierce and increased chance to chain projectiles off of terrain, so like we'll be bouncing bouncing projectiles off of terrain more and stuff, right? And also increased chance to inflict ailments or more shock and things like that. There are like grenade like buffs and stuff. Yeah, I'm not too like fussed about getting grenade buffs, so I'm not probably gonna go and get those things, is what I'm thinking. I might get it, but like it's just gonna be the stun grenade that kind of benefits from this, right? An additional projectile, but like it increased the duration, so that means the grenade's gonna take longer to explode, but then we get an additional projectile, right? So I'm not gonna get cluster bombs, I think, but like grenade here seems pretty nice. So it depends on like what these nodes are over here, but that's quite a lot of nodes to pick up just to get like an extra grenade, right? Especially if you already have one from, what was it, Second Wind, I think will give us an extra grenade. There's also the chance to like activate a grenade a second time with repeating explosives, which could be like an easy pick over here, right? And other than that, I don't think I'm gonna go for power shots, but like full salvo over here, since we have like I think 3 or 4 types of ammo, could be actually usable, but that would depend on whether you can switch between the ammo types relatively fast, right? And then like finally, right, Giant Slay over here, which is good because it does like more damage versus like rare and unique enemies, right? Which might be what we are kind of like gonna struggle with a little bit, because usually you don't have trouble with like normal enemies anyway, right? And also Cull the Hordes would be really good because like 25% increased culling strike threshold, right? So like the 5% that we have would go up by, I think it'll go up to like 6.25% or something against bosses. So Call the Holds could be really, really good with our build. Especially because like we're going to be throwing out so many like tiny little projectiles all the time, right? Other than that, there's like a bunch of lightning stuff that we don't really know about. Like this looks like lightning stuff over here, right? You can kind of tell from like the shape of like these nodes what like they might be, right? That looks like lightning. There seems to be like lightning over here too, so I'm not sure exactly what that's gonna be. That could be useful too. And also like over here there's like this, I think that might be a crossbow, so this could be useful as well. But basically we just want to like head towards this area of the tree. We need more info about the tree before I can say too much, but that's roughly like what I'm planning on doing with the skill tree. And yeah, I'll be playing this build on Twitch and also YouTube at the same time. I think I'm streaming on both. So yeah, drop by and you can see how the build does once the game does come out. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!